In 1984, we lost one of the most influential R&B singers this world has ever seen, and that was Marvin Gaye. Hey everybody, what's up and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, and as you know from my upload yesterday, this month is all about celebrity deaths, suspicious deaths, suicides, murders, unsolved disappearances. Yeah, solved murders, you name it. We're going to cover it all about celebrities this month. And today we're going to be talking about Marvin Gaye. Now, if you don't know who Marvin Gaye is, he was a very influential singer when it came to the music industry, and he was active in singing from 1957 until his death in 1984. Like, he's an amazing singer. Okay, so who is Marvin Gaye? Let's get into a backstory. I'm not going to go too deep into his backstory and into his musical career, because I want to focus more on him and then his actual murder, because who is the perpetrator will definitely cause you to be like, whoa, this is something else today. Liz, what are you doing to me? So, all right. So Marvin Pence Gaye Jr., he was born on the 2nd of April of 1939 at the Freedmen's Hospital, which is in Washington, D.C. Now, he was born to his parents, Marvin Gaye Sr., who was a church minister, and to his mother, Alberta Gaye, who was a domestic worker. Now, where he lived at first was in the public housing projects, which is the Fairfax apartments, which are no longer there. They were demolished. So this is at 1617 First Street Southwest, which is in the neighborhood that's called the Southwest Waterfront. This was the oldest neighborhood in Washington, D.C. at the time. A lot of the houses were very federal style homes, so it was very most of them were older, and most of the buildings were small, and they were in such a state of disrepair. They didn't have any electricity. There was no running water. So a lot of the alleys too in the area were full of 1 or 2 story shacks that were built, and nearly every single house in this area was overcrowded, like too many people. So Marvin and his friends nicknamed this area of the city called Simple City, because it's kind of like half a city and half of the country, basically, because Washington, D.C. is just, yes, it's our nation's capital, but it's kind of weird because, it's in the District of Columbia, which is not technically an actual state, but it's like a city at the same time. You know what I mean? It's weird. It's weird. Anywho, and that's just how I feel. It's weird. So Marvin was actually the child number 2 out of 4 kids. He had 2 sisters, Jean and Ziola, and he had a brother named Frankie. Now, and he also had 2 half-brothers as well. Michael Cooper, now he was from his mother's previous relationship, and then Antoine Gaye, who was his brother via his father having an affair with another woman. So, Marvin started singing when he was in church, and this was when he was about 4 years old. His father would often play the piano to go along with him singing. And Marvin and his family, they were a part of the Pentecostal church in the area known as the House of God. And in this church, it was Hebrew Pentecostalism. So they were very strict. They were very strict conduct church, and they adhered to the Old Testament and to the New Testaments. So they were a very devout family. Marvin really fell in love with music and singing when he was really young. As I just stated, he started singing when he was 4 years old in church. And he would basically say that he wanted to pursue a career in singing, which he eventually would do. He would. And he would perform at the school plays. He sang Mario Lanza's Be My Love at a school play. And then he really found an outlet in singing. Now, his home life was not very good. He would be struck by his father in what consisted of brutal whippings by his dad, and his dad would hit him if he had any shortcomings in life. Now, Marvin described living within his family's house as similar to living with somebody who thinks of themselves as a king, who's very peculiar, changeable, he's cruel, and he's powerful. He also felt that his mother couldn't console him when his father did beat him, and he felt that if she encouraged his singing, like to get past like more than just enjoyment, for him to actually pursue it, that he would be beaten more and that he probably would have committed suicide. His sisters would explain too that Marvin was beaten very often from the age of 7 up into his teenage years. His father had something kind of against him, and maybe it's due to the fact that he was a very soft spoken and very talented person. But so he would end up attending Syfax Elementary School and Randall Junior High School. And when he was in high school, also in middle school, in elementary school too, he would perform singing, but it got to the point where he was in high school that he took it much more seriously. He joined and started singing with the Randall Junior High Glee Club. So he was able to perform in a group. So it wasn't just him, it was him in a group. Now, it was either in 1953 or 1954. This is when they moved into the East Capitol dwellings of the housing projects in DC. And this townhouse apartment was the family's home until 1962. So they lived there for quite a while after they moved. Now, he ended up briefly attending Springarm High School before he transferred to Cardoza High School. And while he was at Cardoza, this is when he joined several different doo-wop groups, including one called the Dippers and one called the DC Tones. Now, his relationship with his father became super strained during his teenage years, and his father would often kick him out of the house. This resulted in Marvin dropping out of high school when he was 17 in 1956 and him enlisting in the United States Air Force as a basic airman. What ended up happening is they were disappointed in him not being able to perform certain tasks. He ended up faking an illness of the mental variety, and he was discharged shortly after. So Marvin's sergeant that he had said that Marvin refused to follow orders and that he was issued a general discharge from service. So he wasn't like dishonorably discharged or anything like that. It was just a general discharge, which is good. So his early career, he started performing with a good friend named Reese Palmer, and they formed a quartet called the Marquis. Now, they performed all over DC, and they started working with Bo Diddley. Now, Bo Diddley worked with Columbia. And basically, so Bo Diddley was an American singer, and he was a guitarist songwriter. And he helped influence the tradition from blues to rock and roll in the music industry, as did Buddy Holly and Elvis Presley and the Beatles. It was that whole transition from blues to rock and roll. It was that early, kind of like rockabilly, very cute transition from here's all that soul, but let's make it not fun, but let's venture off into world unknown and make it something different. So that's really this is the music influence that basically we're kind of getting into right now. Now, Bo Diddley worked with a subsidiary of Columbia called OK Records, or OKEH, so OK or OK. And this is after he failed to have his own label up and running called Chess. Now, the Marquis had a single called Wyatt Earp, and it was co-written by Bo Diddley, but it failed to make a chart, and they were soon dropped by the label. Marvin then started making his own music during this time. Now, one of the co-founders of Moonglows later rehired the Marquis as employees, so they were getting paid for what they were doing. And under co-founder Harvey Fuqua, they ended up changing their name to Harvey and the New Moonglows. and they relocated to Chicago. Now, they recorded several sides for Chess, which is Bo Diddley's record label, but in 1959, and this included a song called Mama Lucy, which is Marvin's first lead vocal recording that was ever put out. Now, they found work as singers for established acts such as Chuck Berry, and they were singing on songs like Back in the USA and Almost Grown. Now, in 1960, this is when they broke up, and Marvin ended up relocating to Detroit with Harvey Fuqua, and this is where he signed to Tri-Fi Records as a session musician. He then started playing drums on several different releases. Well, he ended up performing for Berry Gordy. Now, if you don't know who Berry Gordy is, he worked for Motown. He is the one that helped the Jackson 5 become a thing. Legit. And Michael Jackson is because of Berry Gordy. And he ended up performing for him at during the holiday season in December of 1960. He was so impressed by him that he went out and found Harvey Fuqua and put a contract on Marvin Gaye. He was so interested in him. Now, Harvey agreed to sell his interest of his contract to Berry, and then Marvin was then signed to Motown, but with the subsidiary of Tamla. So it's with Berry Gordy when he really pursued his career for performing jazz and him becoming the true R&B singer that he would turn into. He really, before he released his first single is when he changed his last name. His last name was just G-A-Y. So he ended up putting G-A-Y-E, similar to Sam Cooke, as a way to differentiate himself. So Marvin also was very good at silencing rumors when it came to his sexuality. And if you've never seen a recording of him, he's very in touch with himself. He's very good at his body fluidity. He's very good at his body movements. And he's a very soft-spoken. His voice is very, very melodic. And a lot of people were unsure of his sexuality. And one of the people is his father as well. But anywho, so Marvin released his first single called Let Your Conscience Be Your Guide in May of 1961. And this is off of the album The Soulful Moods of Marvin Gaye. And that came out a month later. His initial recordings failed commercially, but he spent most of the time in 1961 performing as a drummer for the Miracles and the Marvelettes and for Jimmy Reed. And this was for about $5 a week. Sounds like not a lot of money, right? But Marvin took advice on performing with his eyes open because he had a thing about being on stage and closing his eyes. I think because he had stage fright. So as he started doing this more, he became more relaxed and more understanding of how he should be on stage and how to really hone in his presence and really get to a person. Because the way to talk to somebody is you want to have direct eye contact, correct? Because you're talking to them and not at them. Well, if you're singing to them, it invites them to really cling to what you're trying to sing to them. So that's what they really wanted to help Marvin with, because he is already a conscious person when it comes to what he's doing. And now they want him to sing to somebody, looking in their eyes. So it's kind of like a catch-22 for him. He doesn't know if what he's doing is right, but he also doesn't know if what he's doing is wrong. So it's around this time, too, that he started taking dancing lessons from Charlie Atkins as well, which is another Motown artist. And this is for him to really get in touch with himself. That's the early parts of him really understanding his fluidity. So Marvin also was known, too, to not really agree with a lot of things. So they wanted him to attend grooming school courses at John Roberts Powers School for Social Grace in Detroit. And he was so unwilling to comply with this, which this is something he actually regretted later on in life. So in 1962, he ended up co-writing a track for the Marvelettes called Beechwood 4, 5, 7, 8, 9. And he also played the drums. He also had his first solo success with Stubborn Kind of Fellow, which was released in September of 1962. and it reached number 8 on the R&B chart, which is a new one for him, and also hit number 46 on the Hot 100 for Billboard, which that's pretty amazing. Marvin first reached the pop top 40 with a song called Hitchhike, and that was a dance song. That peaked at number 30 at the Hot 100, and then he had Pride and Joy, which became his first top 10 single. That was released in 1963. So he had four songs that he released that ended up in the Hot 100, which is good for him. So there's 3 singles and songs that came off of his second album called The Stubborn Kind of Fella, and that was released in January of 1963. He started touring in 1962, and this was with the Motortown Revue, and it headlined the north and southeastern coast of the United States, and as a part of the Chitlin Circuit. Now, the Chitlin Circuit basically is a collection of venues throughout the eastern, southern, and upper Midwest areas of the United States that it was culturally acceptable for African American musicians or comedians or entertainers to perform. Because at this time, obviously, segregation and racism is very still prominent in the United States. And there's a filmed performance of him at the Apollo Theater, and this takes place in June of 1963, which if I can find the video, I'll put it in a card, or I'll put the URL in my description box for this, because you need to watch it. He is such a fantastic performer that he did not deserve to lose his life. So later in October of 1963, he ended up issuing a live album, and it's called Marvin Gaye Recorded Live on Stage. And Can I Get a Witness became one of his early international successes. So not only is he being heard in the United States, now he's being heard all over the world. So the entire world gets to hear him. Well, in 1964, he ends up doing a duet with Mary Wells in a song called Together. Now, hopefully everybody has heard the song. If not, get out of the rock you're living under. And that reached number 42 on the pop album chart. Now, this album had a 2-sided single. One is Once Upon a Time, and the other one is What's the Matter with You, Baby? And each of them reached in the top 20. His next solo success was How Sweet It Is to Be Loved by You. If you don't know that song either, get out of the same rock that you're living under, because I'm sorry. That is a well-known Marvin Gaye song. Super well-known. So that song was written by Holland Dozier Holland, and that reached number 6 on the Hot 100. And it reached the top 50 in the United Kingdom. So, also in 1964, this is when he appeared in a concert film called the TAMI Show. He also then went on to have 2 number 1 R&B singles in 1965. One is called I'll Be Doggone and Ain't That Peculiar. Both of them became million-dollar sellers. So, Marvin would end up returning to his jazz roots and jazz ballads in a tribute album to Nat King Cole, who had recently just passed away. And he ended up recording a song, It Takes Two, with Kim Weston. It's after this is when he starts working with another woman named Tammy Terrell on a series of duets. And these include Ain't No Mountain High Enough, Your Precious Love, Ain't Nothing Like a Real Thing, and You're All I Need to Get By. All of those songs are super popular too. I love them all. Tammy Terrell ended up collapsing in his arms when they were performing together in Farmville, Virginia, and this happened in October of 1967. Tammy was rushed to the hospital, and this is when they found out that she had a tumor in her brain, and it was malignant. So this ended her career as a live performer. Though she ended up continuing recording music under supervision, she could not perform live anymore. So with her presence on the successful singles, it really kind of put a damper on things for Marvin. Her illness ended up, because of her not being able to be there, there was issues with recording. It led to multiple operations for her to remove the tumor because she was not able to be present, and they wanted to get the tumor out. Marvin was highly devastated by her getting sick, and he just didn't want anything to do with singing because his friend was very sick. So about a year later, on October 6th of 1968, Marvin ended up singing the national anthem during Game 4 of the 1968 World Series, and this was at Tiger Stadium in Detroit. This was between the Detroit Tigers and the St. Louis Cardinals, which that's really cool. That would be, if I was a famous singer, that's something I would want to do, is sing the national anthem. I mean, I've done it at Fort McHenry and then on live TV at a Washington Wizards game, But it's one thing doing it for like a national program that your president's wife does. But if you're doing it as a famous singer, it's a totally another ball game. It would be so cool to do. So in 1968, so later on after this, he records the song I Heard It Through the Grapevine. And this becomes his number one on the Hot 100 for Billboard. And it also reached the top of the charts in many other countries, and it sold over 4 million copies. However, he felt that the success he had was something that he didn't deserve. And he kind of felt like a puppet. He felt like a puppet for Berry Gordy. And he ended up following it up with Too Busy Thinking About My Baby and That's the Way Love Is. Both of them reached the top 10 in 1969 for the Hot 100. So that year, he ended up releasing MPG, which, I mean, that's his initials, and it became his first number one album on the R&B charts. And it's during this time period when Marvin would produce and he would co-write Baby, I'm For Real and The Bells for the Originals, which is another group from Motown, which it often is called Motown's best kept secret. So unfortunately, his friend Tammy Terrell would pass away from cancer in 1970. He attended her funeral, and after this is when he went through a long period of depression. And because of this, he ended up trying out for professional football, the Detroit Lions, and he ended up befriending Mel Farr and Lem Barney. Both of them had gotten gold records for being backup vocalists for Marvin on the What's Going On album. Well, the Detroit Lions eventually declined the invitation for Marvin to try out, and they said it was because of legal liabilities and the fear of him being injured, and because it could affect his musical career, which is nice that they actually declined his invitation. But, I mean, it would have been cool to see what Marvin Gaye could have done on the football field. Let's be real. It would have been awesome. So, Marvin returned to Hitsville, USA, where he recorded his new song, What's Going On. And inspired by an idea by Ronaldo Benson of the Four Tops. And basically, what happened is it's after he witnessed police brutality and an anti-war rally in Berkeley. And when Berry Gordy heard the song, he refused to release it because of his feelings of the song being too political for radio. And he felt that Marvin would lose his audience. So Marvin responded by going on strike from releasing anything, which I mean, I would too. So eventually it was released in 1971, and it reached number one on the R&B charts within a month, and it stayed there for 5 weeks. So Berry Gordy was wrong. And it also reached the top spot on the Cashbox's pop chart, and it reached number 2 on the Hot 100. It sold over 2 million copies. That's how popular his song was. So after he gave an ultimatum to record a full album with Motown with free creative control, Marvin then spent 10 days recording the What's Going On album in March. Motown then issued this album in May after Marvin remixed it in Hollywood. So the album became his first $1 million selling album, and it ended up giving 2 more top 10 singles, which is Mercy Mercy Me and Inner City Blues. So this is one of the first autonomous works that Motown had, giving an artist creative freedom. And it seemed to really set the flow for concept album work for the future that had rhythm and blues and soul music on it. So there's an all music writer would say that the most important and passionate record to come out of soul music is delivered by one of the finest voices, in reference to this album. So for this album too, Marvin received 2 Grammy Award nominations at the 1972 Grammys and several NAACP Image Awards. This album topped Rolling Stone's year-end list and named it as Album of the Year. Billboard magazine also said he was a trendsetter of that year because of the album's success. Now, Marvin then would sign a deal with Motown that's worth about $1 million, and this made it the most lucrative deal to date because it was a black recording artist that signed $1 million deal. So $1 million then is the equivalent to $6.691 million right now. That's how much money he made off of that new deal with Motown. If you make an equivalent to today's time. That's how much money. $6,691,044. That's how much money he made off of that contract. So he would end up responding to the new contract with a soundtrack called Trouble Man. This was released in late 1972. And before the release of Trouble Man, he released a single called You're the Man. Now, the album of the same name was a follow-up to What's Going On. But Motown refused to promote this single. They feared that because of Marvin's liberal political views that it would alienate all the conservative crowd. But as a result of this, because Berry Gordy's a dick, they shelved this project and substituted it for Trouble Man. Flash forward to 2019, on what would have been Marvin Gaye's 80th birthday, Universal Music Group released that album. And in between the releases of What's Going On and Trouble Man, Marvin's family, now flashback to 1971, they would relocate to LA. And this would make Marvin one of the final artists to move there despite early protests to stay in the city. One of the final Motown artists, I should say. So in 1973, in August, he released Let's Get It On album, and its title track of Let's Get It On became #1 on the Hot 100. And he, other singles from the album was Come Get to This, You Sure Loved a Ball, and some radios started refusing to play his songs because it was sexually explicit. But that didn't stop him. No, that didn't. So his final duet project is called Diana and Marvin, and this is with Diana Ross. And this received such international success, despite them having very different artistic styles. So the material that was made for this was crafted by Ashford and Simpson. And this was made because there was a demand from the fans and from Motown. So Marvin said that this concert, the first one for this project, was his first one in 4 years. So it started at the Oakland Alameda County Coliseum on January 4th of 1974. And this performance had such a critical acclaim, and it resulted of the release of the live album Marvin Gaye Live and a live version of Distant Lover, which is off of the album Let's Get It On. So this tour really helped Marvin's reputation as a performer, like a live performer. And at this time, he was earning about $100,000 a night, which is the equivalent of $549,000 in today's dollars. And this is for each performance. So he toured between 1974 and 1975. And ultimately, he would renew his contract with Motown, and of which it allowed Marvin to build his own custom-made recording studio, so he could record his music whenever he wanted to. In 1975, Marvin performed at the UNESCO benefit concert, or the UNESCO benefit concert in New York City at Radio City Music Hall, which is beautiful in person. Go see it, people. And this is to support African literacy, and this resulting in him being commended by the United Nations. And at that time, the ambassador to Ghana, her name is Shirley Temple Black, and Kurt Waldheim, they were so inspired by him. This album, this next album that he released is called I Want You. It came out in 1976 with the track I Want You that reached #1. This album would go over to sell over 1 million copies. So another 1 million copy seller that he has. And because of this album, he then goes on his first European tour in a decade. And he starts off in Belgium. And then in early 1977, he would release another live album called Live at London Palladium. This sold over 2 million copies thanks to the success of the studio song Gotta Give It Up, which was a #1 in September of 1977. And Marvin would then, in 1977, be the opener for Radio City Music Hall's New York Pop Arts Festival. Like I have kind of explained, this is kind of like the real intro of Marvin's career. And he became very, very popular with his music. It was not the normal. It was not what Berry Gordy wanted. It was not what Motown wanted at the time, but it was something that people in the United States needed and didn't know they needed, because it was something new. It was something fresh. It was something that nobody had ever done before. And here comes Marvin Gaye with that soulful, soulful, soulful voice that nobody else had at the time. The only person that literally could reflect him at this time with a voice like his was Diana Ross. And for him to perform with her was something that had never happened before. And I know it sounds like I'm getting super heated about this, but his career is something to be so inspired about. A lot of artists now that are like one-hit wonders and things like that, if they actually read the biographies of a lot of different artists, then they would totally understand the make and break of the actual industry and what it's like to really build yourself. Because, I mean, Marvin started he started singing at 4. He was beaten by his dad because his dad didn't want him to sing. Like, he played the piano, but eventually it became too much. And then he started doing quartets, and then he started working as a session singer, and then he built his way up. He basically told his boss to fuck himself, and they released a song that changed the time. Marvin Gaye, to me, is one of the most inspirational people I have ever read about, and I have ever heard or listened to. And I mean that true to my heart. He literally is one of the most inspirational people I've ever read about. And it's deeply saddening knowing that his life choices is what led up to his ultimate demise. But so I know I wasn't going to talk about his music career, but why not? We're already in the depths. We're getting close to D-Day. It's okay. So in December of 1978, this is when he releases Here, My Dear, which is inspired from the fallout of his marriage to Anna Gordy. Anna Gordy is the elder sister of Berry Gordy, and that was his first marriage. Now, this song was recorded with the intention of keeping a portion of its royalties and giving it to her as an alimony payment. But it performed poorly on the charts. So during this period, this is when his addiction to cocaine intensified as well. And it had him deal with some severe financial losses as well with the IRS and issues with them. This led him to move to Maui, where he also struggled to record a disco-influenced album. And this was called Love Man. And its release would have been in February of 1980, but he would later shelve it. So later that year, he would go on his next European tour, his first one in 4 years. And by the time of the tour, he then relocated to London because he feared that he would be imprisoned because he did not pay his taxes, which he now was at the point where he owed $4.5 million in back taxes to the IRS, which is the equivalent of $14,799,475 in today's time. That's a lot of money you owe the IRS. So Marvin then reworked Love Man from its original disco concept and changed it to a socially conscious album that really prompted religion and the possibility of end time. And this is kind of loosely based off of a chapter in the book of Revelation. So the titular song of this album, In Our Lifetime, that he worked on the album for much of 1980, was released. It was worked on in London studios such as Air and Odyssey Studios. So in the fall of that year, somebody actually stole that tape of a rough draft of the album from one of the traveling musicians that worked with Marvin. And they took the master tape and they brought it to Motown's quarters in Hollywood. Motown then remixed it and released it. When Marvin heard of the release, he was pissed because, here's Motown. They stole a tape that he was working on and it wasn't finished. And he then said that Motown edited and remixed the album without his consent, and this didn't allow him to finish the product, so they released it while it was unfinished. and they altered his album art and removed the album's title question mark too, which muted how the irony of the album. He also accused the album of Rush releasing and compared his unfinished album to an unfinished Pablo Picasso painting. He then vowed he would never record any more music for Motown. So it's next in February 14th of 1981. He then, under the advice of a promoter called Freddie Cusart, that Marvin relocate to his apartment in Ostend, Belgium with Freddie. So while he was there, he was shied away from heavy drug use and he started exercising, taking care of himself. He ended up attending a local Ostend church and he started regaining a lot of confidence that he had lost. And after several months of recovery, this is when Marvin wanted to really get back on stage. And he started some short-lived tour in England called Heavy Love Affair and in Ostend, and this is from June to July of 1981. Now, his personal attorney, Curtis Shaw, would later say that Marvin's stay in Ostend was the best thing that ever happened to him. When word got around that Marvin was planning to make a musical comeback and leave Motown, CBS, the urban president, Larkin Arnold, was able to convince Marvin to sign with CBS Records. So, in March 23rd of 1982, this is when Motown and CBS negotiated the release from Motown. And the details of the contract were not revealed because there was a possible negative effect on the singer's settlement because he owed the IRS a lot of money. And this, because they didn't release the how much money that CBS would have to pay the IRS and Motown would have to pay them. It stopped a bidding war with the competing labels. So his first post-Motown album is called Midnight Love. And this has his song Sexual Healing. If you've never heard that song, again, get out of the rock you're living under. He then recorded it in Ostend at Freddie's apartment, and it was released in September of 1982. This was his biggest career success. It spent 10 weeks at number one. It was the biggest R&B hit of the 1980s, according to the Billboard stats. And it was later translated to the Billboard Hot 100 in January of 1983, where it would peak at number 3. And it would also reach a top spot in New Zealand and Canada and reached a top 10 in the United Kingdom on the OCC singles chart. In Australia and in Belgium, it would later sell over 2 million copies. And in the United States alone, it would also sell a lot. This became Marvin's most successful single to date. This song was shot at Ostend's Casino Curacao. Well, the video for the song. This also marked his first 2 Grammy Awards, which include Best R&B Male Vocals in February of 1983. And he also won the American Music Award for R&B Soul category. That was amazing for him, for his career. So People magazine really called it America's hottest turn-on since Olivia Newton-John's song, Let's Get Physical. If you've never seen that music video, you need to. Midnight Love was released in stores less than a month after the single was released, and it was just as successful. It peaked at the top 10. It was Marvin Gaye's 8th number 1 album on the top Black albums charts, and it eventually sold over 6 million copies, 3 million alone in the United States. He really came into his own once he was able to leave Motown. And I feel that Marvin really was able to fully understand himself after he left Berry Gordy's claws and his ex-wife Anna's claws. So in 1983, he sang the Star Spangled Banner at the NBA All-Stars game in Inglewood. And he was also accompanied by Gordon Banks, who played the studio tape from the stands. Now, the following month is when he performed at Motown 25, Yesterday, Today, and Forever Special. This in a May appearance on a show called Soul Train, which was fantastic. I've seen tapings of it. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. It became his final TV performances. He then embarked on his final tour, which is called Sexual Healing Tour, and it started on April 18th of 1983, and it would end on August 14th of 1983. So it started in San Diego and ended at the Pacific Amphitheater in Costa Mesa, California. Now, he was really back in the ruts of his cocaine addiction at this time, and he really was triggered by his paranoia and other illnesses because of his cocaine addiction. So following the end of the concert, he then moved into his parents' house in LA in early 1984. Midnight Love was nominated for a Grammy in the Best Male R&B Vocal Performance category, and this would be his 12th and final nomination. Now, like I said before, he was married to Anna Gordy, who is the sister of Berry Gordy. They married in June of 1963, and they separated in 1973. And their divorce was finalized in November of 1977. He later would marry a woman named Janice Hunter in October of 1977, so he was not legally single for long. Him and Janice ended up separating in 1979, and they would divorce in 1981. Marvin was a father. He did have 3 children. There was Marvin III, Nona, and Frankie. Marvin III is actually the biological son of Anna's niece, Denise Gordy, who was 16 at the time of birth. And Nona and Frankie were actually born to Marvin's second wife, Janice. And at the time of his death, Marvin was survived by his 3 children, his parents, and his 5 siblings. So let's get into his murder, shall we? So on the afternoon of April 1st of 1984, he got into a fight. Well, he tried to get in between the fight of his parents that happened on that afternoon. And this is at their house at Hancock Park, which is in the district of LA that they lived in. He became involved in a physical altercation with his dad. And it's then when his dad shoots Marvin twice, once in the chest that pierces his heart and the other one in his shoulder. This shooting took place in Marvin's bedroom at 12:38 p.m. The first shot killed him. He was pronounced dead at 1:01 p.m. after his body was brought to California Hospital Medical Center. And this is one day before his 45th birthday. His funeral, so his body was cremated and he was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park, Hollywood Hills, and his ashes were scattered in the Pacific Ocean. So he has a placard, but his ashes were scattered. So his father was initially charged with first-degree murder, but his charges were reduced to voluntary manslaughter because they found a brain tumor. His father was also given a suspended 6-year sentence in probation, and ultimately his dad would die in 1988 in a nursing home. So for a man to have such a beautiful career, he went out in the quickest way possible. And that sounds really disturbing of me to say, but it's very sad because we lost such an influential singer that day by the hands of his father. And there's theories that there's ulterior motives of when it comes to why his dad shot him and why there was a gun involved. And I mean, it's one of those things where it's just you'll never know. We'll never know. Was it intentional that his father actually killed him? Was it just the fight that happened? Was it actually his father's now understanding that possibly his son is gay and has been hiding it for years, and here it is, he's coked out and I want to fight with him, you know what I mean? We will never know because his father is dead and Marvin is dead. I don't wish this family any harm by making this video. This is simply to educate others on what has happened in Hollywood, especially when it comes to the deaths of these celebrities. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed today's true crime case of Marvin Gaye. Hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, and turn your bell notification on all. That way you know whenever I upload, because I upload quite frequently. And I will see you guys tomorrow in a brand new video. Bye, you guys.